right. Well, welcome, Eric. So good to spend this time with you. We're looking forward to the next few minutes of just kind of getting to hear more of your story and the benefit that it'll bring to everybody else tuning in here who's walking a similar journey that you've been on. So thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here, Luke. Thanks.
Yeah. So you've been connected to GMHC for several years, but not everybody's interacted with you or heard from you who's tuning in. So do you mind just sharing a bit about yourself, some of your story and context about what you've done in medical missions and maybe what you're doing now?
Sure. So, tracing it back historically, particularly in regards to the GMHC conference in Louisville, I was interested in medical missions and exploring it when I was in medical school. I had some friends that were interested in it as well. I was interested in opportunities to serve populations that were in need of medical care and suffering from various disparities. And I was also interested in particular in kind of cross-cultural situations. So that led me to come down and visit the GMHC conference when I was a second year medical student in 2003. And the most interesting thing that happened at that time was meeting a third year medical student from another medical school who ended up being my wife, and we will celebrate 20 years of marriage later this year. And she was one of those that was there at the conference because she already knew exactly what she was committed to, and nothing was going to change her mind for it. And so, an interesting piece of the vocational story was realizing that I felt called to service and I felt called to intercultural or cross-cultural organizations, and but I didn't really feel like I needed to make a decision yet. And then all of a sudden I did need to make a decision because I was interested in someone else who had a certain direction that was going forward. And that really, in the end of the day, was, taking that relationship and the calling to that relationship seriously was part of, I think, how God called me to the medical missions work that I've been doing since then. So that was my first time at GMHC, and went on to family medicine residency. My wife is an OB resident. And when we were about a year and a half away from finishing residency, had a couple of friends from our home church in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we were, who were also interested in medical missions, and we were all finishing training at the same time. And we had enjoyed encouraging one another, but we came to a point of saying, is it possible that the Lord has brought us together in order to pursue missions as a community of families instead of just individual families? Or are we just meant to encourage one another and then go our separate ways? And actually, we took some time to pray and we made a GMHC retreat into or a conference into sort of a retreat in a little group at the beginning, and came to the conclusion that we wanted to pursue this as a community of families. And so we finished residency in 2009. We went to three families, joined the Samaritan's Purse post-residency program together, and moved to Kenya for 2 years. Learned a lot, found that education was a fantastic way to disciple and multiply our efforts, and looked for longer term places where we could invest in doing African medical education and discipleship, and picked up a few new teammates and friends along the way, and ended up deciding to move to Burundi, which is where I am right now. And mostly because the need in the place was extreme. Burundi, by most accounts, is the poorest country, or at least one of the poorest countries in the world, depending on where you look. They were emerging from a number of years of war, and yet there was a Burundian-led Christian medical school wanting to teach their students at a rural hospital that needed a lot of development and help, and we're soliciting help from other people to do that. And so that's kind of what we came into. We joined our mission sending organization, which is Surge, and went to France for a year because we didn't know how to speak French, and we needed to function where we are. And then in 2013, we landed in Burundi, and now we're coming up on 12 years of being here and pursuing the work that we set out to do from the beginning. And so we've had opportunities to come back to GMHC from time to time and speak. I don't remember all the different years and the different subjects, but I do remember, I think it was 2018. Yeah. They asked us to do a panel discussion on marriage and missions. And because Rachel and I had met each other at that very venue 15 years before, we at least knew what we would sort of use to break the ice of the conversation.
Right.
that, but it was a lot of fun, and we've appreciated the opportunities to share and chances to meet people that are considering different aspects of showing forth God's love and His grace and His truth and His compassion via the medical skills that they have all around the world.
Yeah. Amazing. What an incredible journey. And just full circle. I mean, for so those of you tuning in, you should make it to the conference because apparently anything can happen when you
And
attend
can
the
I,
G.
not the worst message you could pull from that.
Yeah. No, so cool. To see that kind of full circle, that full picture. And honestly, like really encouraging to just see. I mean, I think you did a great job of kind of walking us through what your full journey has looked like up to this point, which is hard to do succinctly. I mean, there's so many, you've experienced so many things, it's hard to sum up probably all the wins and losses along the way. But yeah, it was just fascinating to just hear you share kind of from beginning to end what that whole journey has looked like for you, and how crossing each bridge as it comes, from realizing you can't speak French, so you need to go move to France for a year, like all these phases of the journey. So
Yep.
really cool to hear. So kind of the topic that you and I are diving into, that you proposed here is, um, what we're titling this is God's strength and weakness, and so a necessary promise for medical missions. We're talking about weakness in healthcare missions, and I think your story particularly touches on this, and I think it's just going to be really valuable for everybody tuning in here. I mean, this can be one of our biggest roadblocks in life as Christians in general, but it just gets exposed even more when we're in ministry settings, in particular. So, with your kind of long-term missionary, you've been a long-term missionary doctor for a while. Can you tell us a bit about kind of what, uh, backing up a little bit, like, would love to hear, like, um, well, I guess you've shared a bit about, I was going to ask you kind of what led to this work. You shared quite a bit about that, but if you want to kind of expound, that's great. But more particularly, if we could kind of move into, if you could share a moment or two that you felt particularly confronted with your own insufficiency as a medical missionary.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think people want to use the medical skills they have in the best motivations to serve the Lord by caring for people that are made in His image and testifying by doing so to something about what the kingdom of God looks like. And medicine sort of trains you to gather all these skills together so that you can go and make a difference and you can go and win. And if one of the lessons that I think I was confronted with pretty quickly is that if you want to be there when you can help, you got to be there when you can't.
Hmm.
And there's going to be tons and tons of situations where you can't, and they don't sort themselves out ahead of time where you can find a situation where you can go in and do that only for the situations where you can help and not bother with ones where you can't. They're all mixed up. You don't know ahead of time, and you have to be able to endure those things together. There's 1,000 stories that I could talk about. Let me pick a couple of them. Several years ago, I was rounding on pediatrics here in Burundi, and there was this mom on the first bed out of about 20, 30 patients that we needed to see. You got a big crowd of med students around me that are being taught and nurses, and her baby is just doing terribly, doesn't have enough oxygen despite maximal oxygen. It's just, obviously not in a good place and is in a lot of danger for the baby's life. And mom has been there a couple days and doesn't see improvement. And so she says, I just want to go home. Um, and so we have to take time and explain to her, like, your baby can't even get home. I don't think your baby would survive in order to get home. I know it looks bad, but let's keep working at this. We took time to pray with her, and we move on eventually, and we go to like the fifth bed. We're still in the same room, and a student taps me on the shoulder and says the baby has stopped breathing. And in our setting, that means that the baby has passed away. There's not an opportunity or a setup to be able to try to bring someone back from something like that. And so now I'm in the middle of the room with everyone, and trying to figure out the right thing to do. And so we invite mom, and dad is actually there too. And we invite them to a room across the hall so we can talk to them in private, try to comfort them. And we give them the news that their baby has passed away, which of course they had suspicion of, but they now have confirmed. Mom throws herself on the floor, down on the concrete floor. She takes this hand towel that she has with her and she throws it over her head, and she starts sobbing and crying and crying and crying. And she's speaking fast and I can't understand what she's saying in local language here. And then the dad, who's sitting on the chair, starts talking, and he's also got very pressured speech, and he starts crying, and he says something that I don't catch. I kind of catch it. And the nurses next to me are kind of horrified at what he said, and I'm not sure what's going on. And after a little bit, things kind of calm down, and they turn to me and they're like, he says that last year they were here and they had a baby a couple months younger than this one who came to our hospital as well, and that baby died. And now this other baby's died, and now they don't have any living children. And he says that he wants to build a family, and so he's going to take a different wife because it doesn't seem like he can do that with the wife that he has. And that's when they had sort of been reproachful about it. And anyway, there's a lot of conversation going on between the nurses and between this family, and the whole thing seems overwhelming to me. But in addition to that, I'm recognizing that there's a room full of medical students to teach and a room full of patients that are also sick that I need to go and see at some point in time. Wow. And then finally the dad says, look, I'm not going to leave her. I'm sorry. I'm not going to leave her. This is so hard. But I take that back. And then the mom, who's been on the floor the whole time with her head covered by this towel, you hear her talk, and she says, it doesn't matter. I can't go back to the village anymore. I've just got too much shame. I can't go back. And here I am in the middle of that. And there's about a million ways in which I'm not up to this task. We didn't have the medical facilities to do it. I'm not a pediatric critical care doctor. I have some things to bring to the table, but other people might have more. There's linguistical challenges going on. There's, major social conflict. I don't know how to manage the time that I have before me. I'm leaning on people around me, hoping that they're choosing to do the right thing culturally in this situation. You can feel massively, massively out of your depth. For all those reasons are mostly external to me. There are things that I think almost anyone in that situation would have had. A useful other story might be when I was in Kenya. This was early on. There was a young lady who came in, and she had trouble breathing, and she had swollen legs, and we took an X-ray, and she had a big heart, and medical doctors recognized that probably means she has heart failure, and so we started treating her for that. Really nice lady. Several days in, she's just not getting better, not really sure what's going on. And then after several days, her one leg swells up a lot more than the other leg. And pieces sort of click into place from a medical standpoint that, oh, she probably has a clot in her leg. And oh, that means that's probably the reason she hasn't been able to breathe this whole time, is because it migrated to her lungs rather than the thing that we were doing. And I said to her, have you ever had this happen before? And she's like, yeah, I had it happen 3 years ago. And I had not thought to ask her. And if I had asked her, and if I'd known that it happened to her before, there's a good chance I might have been able to find it sooner. Anyway, we rapidly switched her to appropriate treatment for that. But the next day she gets up to walk to the shower and dies. And that one is a good story to add to the other story, because I don't know if I had done things differently, if I had done things better, I don't know if it would have made a difference. Maybe it wouldn't have, but it might have. And we all face those kind of situations too, where weakness becomes failure with potentially real consequences. And what are you going to do about that? And in a world of limited resources, in a world of desperate situations, the kind of things that characterize medical missions in resource poor environments, it can happen to any healthcare professional anywhere, and it probably will to some extent, it's universal in that sense, but it gets ramped up. And so, those are just two kind of random samplings of ones that kind of stick out of my mind. But like I said at the beginning, if you're going to go to help, you got to be there when you can't. And that means that I think anyone, I can't really imagine a circumstance where you're going to walk into, you're there because they desperately need help. And here you are, and you sort of have what you need and you sort of don't have what you need. But one thing you are virtually guaranteed to do is to come face to face with like, I am not up to this. I'm not sufficient to the task that's before me. And then the question becomes, what do you do with that?
Yeah, man. Yeah, and there's probably a finite number of ways to go with that. Like, like one route would be try to act like you do, which is going to
Yeah.
crush, right? And lead to all kinds of other problems, or um, maybe push to some kind of surrender. And I look forward to kind of exploring what that's looked like for you. So, I mean, great examples. And I think you mentioned like any medical professionals are going to run into this type of experience no matter where they work. But in resource poor settings, in healthcare missions and resource poor settings, it gets ramped up, like you said. So, in your experience, when medical missionaries come from afar from anywhere, or maybe more specifically, because our audience is mostly, from the U.S., to start working in some setting that's, resource poor or just completely different than a setting here in the U.S., what would you say are some of their common struggles? And specifically, like what are ways that weakness presents in those struggles?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've had the opportunity to not only experience myself and experience in my wife and close friends of mine kind of going through these processes, but I've also had, you know, numerous experiences where I'm the relatively settled one and other new people are landing and I'm watching them and trying to help them as they navigate these kind of situations, being new. And of course, it's reminding me of, I remember what that was like, and what it's still like in some ways, but it's a little different after all these years. I think people know that there's challenges, and those challenges can be exactly what they thought they would be, and they can be just as hard as they thought they were going to be. So, you show up and half the people on the ward have HIV and malaria, and you're thinking, I'm a doctor and I'm board certified and I've finished all my training and I'd like to think I'm decent at it. And yet I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't really know how to treat HIV complications because that's done by someone else. And we don't even have malaria, in the US. And I remember slight things from that. Like, so that one, I think people think about ahead of time and they realize they're going to face that. Or they realize, for example, that like, when I have a suspicion of this problem, maybe I'm not going to have the medicine I would normally reach for, or maybe I'm not going to have the diagnostic test I reach for. And they may or may not be right about that. Most of the time, the stuff they're going to have to do without is considerably more than what they had imagined, because you just don't think about not having stuff until you don't.
Right.
But some of those I think that can be really hard. And so like that one leads to a really common struggle, which is sort of this feeling of like, if this person in front of me was in America and I was treating them, they wouldn't have their life threatened right now, but instead they do. And that's true, and that's really hard, and that's a really common thing that people often deal with. But there's all these other problems that mess things up and make it hard that people don't see coming. And I think to some extent it's harder because they don't see it coming. So, you show up and you're there for whatever period of time you're there for, and you're there to try to do whatever you can to help. And you find that like, the nursing staff who works in this day in and day out, and this is their life, and they've been there for 10 years and they're going to be there long after you're gone. And they're not, they don't seem as dedicated as you are. And they're not moving as fast as you think they should be. And they don't seem to be understanding that this is a desperate situation which needs immediate action. They seem to think it's just another day for them, which it is in some ways. And you can kind of know that, but it still feels wrong. And so, that kind of struggle of realizing like I can't get done what I need to get done because I thought these people would be glad I'm here and we're all like in it together. And instead I feel like I'm pushing against the grain. Um, if you push deeper and you're trying to actually develop things and push for training, it's like, where are the needed pieces from outside of myself that, you know, why can't this be easier and why can't that be easier? Why does everything have to be so hard to get done? Even the stuff that feels like it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
even the setting, it's so hard, and I can't even explain to you why it's so hard. And those things kind of push back against you and make you sort of feel like this is not, I didn't anticipate these kind of challenges. I didn't anticipate the way that I would be even weaker than I thought I was because of all these other factors that are there.
Mm.
And that can be even more difficult.
Yeah. So it sounds really disorienting, kind of
Yeah.
launching you into being confronted with your limitations and weaknesses. Yeah, can you speak to how those weaknesses and limitations start to present themselves or kind of manifest in people in your role?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably what most people would think. Some people get super sad and depressed.
Mm.
As you said, the disorienting piece, I think it's a good word for it. The sense of like, what am I doing here? It's not what I thought I was going to be doing here. A major sense. I mean, and this is kind of a whole other side thing, but the number of people long term that I've talked with who are making this incredible impact in their work and lives. I mean, let's talk about a work for which the result is thousands of people who are not dead or who are not blind or who are not whatever. And
Mhm.
yet they get home at the end of the day and they're like, and I felt this way too. And you just think, nothing I do matters.
Oh, yeah.
And and the amazing thing is like that is so obviously false. And yet the manifestation of all these things, when you watch failure after failure, you miss the things that are mattering. And you can have this profound sense of like nothing I do matters when if you could see it from another perspective, you would know it's not true, but it's not how you feel. So those kind of things kind of come up, and then obviously people get angry. I've seen lots of new people coming from the West that yell at African nurses because they think that's the right thing to do, and it's too important to worry about being polite without realizing that. And I would say this generally is true that politeness aside, it's just not. It's counterproductive, and it's not going to work. And so it should be abandoned for the sake of in ineffectiveness. But it's hard. It's hard to have all those feelings kind of mounting inside you and figuring it out. But in terms of like approach to it, which you had sort of alluded to this before, like I kind of would categorize them as three. Like number one is all right, I'm weak. The answer is like, well, let's get stronger. So I'm going to go and get more training, or I'm going to go and raise more money, or I'm going to go and build up this new system or whatever else. Like, let's try to get stronger, which is not a bad strategy in certain situations, but it's not going to erase the problem. You're still going to have something. The next level of weakness is going to be there waiting for you. I think the second strategy is to pretend that you're not weak, and you can blame shift, or you can just like not focus on those things, but you can in some ways sort of ignore it
Yeah.
and pretend that's not the case. And then I think the third and novel way is kind of what the Bible presents to us about what God has to say about weakness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. So how um well we'll get into that one question leading into that though. I'd love to hear, obviously you've experienced these things firsthand.
Mhm.
Love to hear you speak to kind of in those moments of struggle and weakness where God has met you, and then we can get into kind of how the a biblical view of human weakness and all of that. But where has God met you, and how has your Christian faith and worldview informed how you face those difficult situations?
Can I answer that without talking about the Bible stuff? Because I think that
All one, yeah, totally.
yeah, because I mean, I do think it's one of these situations in which, sometimes God meets us by, his presence working in our heart or by the circumstances that he arranges around us. But sometimes he meets us by showing us some truth that we need to know in his word, which helps us to reframe and rethink about that. And for me, in kind of this journey for weakness, this is one of those examples. And so I'll just kind of go with that. So, summary statement. and I think most people would do this if they've looked at it a lot. Like if you had to choose one little section of the Bible to sort of address this question, it would be 2 Corinthians 12, where which is a pretty well-known story where Paul has had some kind of glorious spiritual vision, and in order that he wouldn't become too conceited about having this vision, the Lord gives him a thorn in the flesh, which is no one knows what, and Paul doesn't like it, and Paul wants it to go away, and he pleads with the Lord, and the Lord says, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And Paul concludes that I will rejoice when I'm weak, because I'm weak. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. And so what to say about that? I'll try to go back to narrative about that. I mean, there's more to be said about the Bible side of that, which we can go back to if you want to. But I think when I was, in my first months, I mean, the first time I took call for a weekend in pediatrics and moved to Kenya, I had 5 kids die in 48 hours, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And 4 of them died in the first 24 hours, I think. I was just like, I can't do this, and I can't be responsible for caring for these people when this is the circumstances that I'm part of. And and coming into my mind is this idea that my strength is made perfect in weakness. So my first observation was that I think that for a long time I was automatically substituting the prepositions there, and I knew that verse, but I had thought that it said, or functionally I thought that it said, my strength is made perfect despite weakness. And that's not what it says. And I don't think that's what it should say. And in weakness is actually much more consistent with the rest of what the Bible has to say about this. Like it's in weakness. And so what's the difference between those two? Well, despite kind of means
Easy too, real quick, to think about how easy it is to hear it the other way, though. I mean, it's
yeah,
like despite weakness.
yeah.
Even though
Like,
it doesn't
don't
say
worry, I won't let your weakness get in the way
right.
of the strength. And that's not what it says. It says, my strength is made perfect in weakness, like right there. That's where the strength is made perfect. And I think another way you can wrap that around is the weakness is intentional. The weakness is on purpose. And I heard those words and realized the difference between despite and in. And it was this profound comfort to think of, it's a promise. This is a promise. It's a mystery, and it's a promise. It's a promise in that you don't exactly know how this is all going to happen, but you're holding on to it in hard times because God has promised that this is true. So it helps you persevere. That's what promises do. But it's a mystery in that you don't really understand how that works totally. I read this thing that said a mystery is something that you can't fully understand, but that doesn't mean it's something that you can't understand at all. And I think that this is one of those kind of mysteries. Like you can kind of get glimpses of it, but you're not going to totally understand it. Because following this sense of comfort, like I'm walking home at the end of the day, I'm dragging my feet, I'm feeling totally beat up and discouraged. I'm wondering if I'm just going to get home and get a phone call that says, "Come up here. There's another kid coding," and I have this promise that is in my heart from the Word of God that says, "My strength is made perfect in weakness," and all I know is I'm weak, and so that's really good news.
Yeah.
So you sit with that for a while, and it's good and it's comforting, and it can be comforting and should be comforting, even if that's kind of as far as you go with it. But for me, and I think for most people, there's going to come this sense of saying, like, is that really true? Like, how does that happen? Like,
Yeah.
what how is God's strength being made perfect in this thing in front of me, in my own misses, and in all the brokenness that's around me, and in this young person who's dying in front of me, or whatever terrible circumstance that you're encountering. Like, you start to ask the how question, and and I think eventually you do have to ask the how question, and that's a question that has fascinated me a lot. Um, so response number one to that is, how does that happen? I think response number one is, I don't know, and no one knows. And it would be the height of folly to say that. And this is where I think it's important to recognize that this is a mystery. Not that you can't know anything about it, but you're not going to know everything about it. We're talking about being weak.
Yeah.
If we are weak, then we're not going to understand it all. Um, so that's kind of step one. And then my second step, just in my own thinking about this, was like, as time goes on, I think maybe not knowing is actually part of the answer to this question.
Hmm.
Because I'm a doctor and I'm set to know things, and I'm set to see value in knowing things and knowing what to do in these situations. And I don't know what to do. And when I don't know, I have to wait and I have to trust, and I hate it. And it really wrecks my pride.
Man.
And my pride is something that, for me personally, I'm speaking about myself, like compared to other people, I think that my pride is a huge besetting sin that is a danger and a poison and a trap to so many of the things that God is doing in the relationships around me and whatever else. And this thing that is so hard in my heart, all of a sudden, not knowing because I'm weak, has started to put a crack in my pride.
Hmm.
And it's like this little glimpse of, oh, weakness accomplished something that I couldn't seem to accomplish otherwise,
Hmm.
which is really important
Yeah.
and is really good and is really powerful. It looks like that's kind of what God says is going to happen, that his strength will be made perfect in weakness. And so this humility piece is an example of how, of one way in which something could possibly, or one could imagine that this is going forward. And after that, there's like a couple other, like you start to see other ways in which weakness creates something that you can see is actually really necessary and really good. And that doesn't answer the question. I mean, again, just kind of running through the whole thought process here, like, was my personal humility like worth the death of this kid? Like, well, I mean, we should be extremely troubled by that question. But that's not the point. The point, I think, is to be able to envision that there is a possibility that it's true. It's not to say I found the explanation in this circumstance, this happened, so that happened, and so it's all good. It's to say that, like, God is doing what he promises to do.
Yeah.
And if he's doing it in some ways, then it opens the possibility that he's doing it in other ways that you don't see.
Hmm.
And if we can believe that there's other ways that he's doing it that we can't see, then we can find hope to cling to this promise and persevere in the midst of it, even if we don't understand.
Yeah. Man. Thank you for wrestling with all of that. I mean, at a certain point, I think you said, like, we all need to start asking the how question. You come to a point where you just kind of have to ask the how question. Um, and your wrestling through all of that is really helpful to the rest of us, just hearing your story. Um, but one, that it's okay to ask that how question and to wrestle with that and to sort that out in the context of your real experiences. Um, you mentioned connecting dots between, um, I think maybe some of the wrong things, like uh, having thoughts about, like, is it really worth my own humility to have this kid die? Well, in a way, that's connecting the wrong dots, but easy to see, like, how you could kind of make that jump when you're trying to sort through all of this. Well, did that have to happen so that I could, and it's bigger
Right.
than, it's like God's working in the midst of the circumstances. He's not orchestrating circumstances in order to teach you a lesson, but he's doing that work in you through what's happening.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, to try to answer the question that I was trying to answer there, which you said was correct, connecting the wrong dots, is like, I think that's God's question. But my question, which is a real question, is like, can I trust him
Yeah.
with the promise that he's given me, and that what this promise says about who God is and what he does is actually true? And that's where I don't need to know the answer to God's question, but I do need to imagine
Yeah.
and find a way to believe that what he says is actually true. And I think that over my years of experience, that both in the Bible, like reading it more broadly, as well as in my own experience and seeing things take place more broadly, that I have grown in my belief that that actually is true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So take us on a bit of that journey, right? Like you had to, you wanted to get to a point where you weren't trying to answer God's question, but where you wanted to kind of bolster your own trust in God's promise, which looks a lot like studying and diving into it and asking questions, not just kind of blindly accepting. Because like in a real sense, you couldn't just blindly accept. You needed to kind of back up your trust in a way. Like where did you go? What did that journey look like? Um, I imagine diving into scripture, studying this topic. What was that journey like?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that it's super profound, other than to say that, and you know, a wise friend one time just kind of said to me, like, you keep talking about First Corinthians 12, like this is not like a one-off proof text. Like this is consistent with especially the rest of Corinthians. So Corinthians is a great place to look through. So for example, Second Corinthians 1 is where Paul is saying, like, I don't want I'm gonna botch some of this, but he's saying, I don't want you guys to be uninformed about how hard everything was for us. We were under so much pressure. It felt like we had received the sentence of death. But this happened in order that we wouldn't trust in ourselves. We were trusting God who raises the dead, and he did deliver us, and we will set our hope on him again. And so the piece there is like Paul's weak again. He's talking about his weakness, a different weakness, but still Paul. But he's also giving he gives the reason, like he gives a narrative for it. So it has this intentional weakness piece. He's saying the reason we were under so much weakness that we felt like we were going to die is so that we would stop trusting ourselves and start trusting in the Lord who raises the dead. So it's like there's the intentional weakness in God's strategy again, right? So Corinthians is sort of a spotlight area there, but Old Testament, like Gideon is a fantastic example. The army was big and God didn't want the big army. Why didn't he want the big army? So that the Israelites would know that it is him and not them who delivered them from the Midianites. And so he purposely winnows down. He like takes a big strong army and just does whatever he needs to do to make it a small weak army so that when he comes to deliver them, and he's very, very clear about why that's going on there. The weakness is intentional. And I think you see some of the same things with Jesus talking about little children in the kingdom, when looking at the way that David could glorify the Lord in his battle against Goliath as a little kid, or as a young man, like who's not up to the physical standards. Like all of those things are there to shine the light on the fact that it is God's power, and you see God's power more because he uses weak vessels, right? And again, 2 Corinthians 4, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this power is not from us, but it's from God. That's why it's there. So I think for me, from a biblical standpoint, I don't know that like the rest of biblical survey of the question really made me think terribly different about it, other than to really reinforce the idea that like this is a pervasive biblical theme. This is not just like a one-time thing here, but like all through the story of God's interactions with his people and all through the Bible, you can trace threads like this, and it is a consistent characteristic of how God acts. Like Paul was Paul was just living in the stream of like all of the scripture that had come before him when he said what he said in 2 Corinthians 12. Um, yeah, there's some beautiful, I mean, some other things that I like to sort of throw out there for people, like years ago, I heard a little quote that Brandon Manning, the late Brandon Manning, used to like to state, which is from and anyone who's watching this you could just Google Thurton Wilder, who's a famous playwright. He won a couple of Pulitzers early in the 20th century, and one little play he wrote that did not win a Pulitzer is called "The Angel That Troubled the Waters." and you can Google it. It's free as a PDF, and it takes like 10 minutes to read. It's not even really long enough to be a play. Anyway, the setting of it is the biblical scene where in the pool of Bethesda, the Gospel of John, where they would see that the angel troubled the waters, and then the first person to get in the pool would be healed. And it's there, and there's a physician actually who comes to be healed of his melancholy, of his depression. And when he comes in there, there's an angel that stops and says, "This isn't for you. You need to turn back." And he says, "I don't think you understand how much I'm suffering from this, like how much this depression is making things so hard for me." And the angel says, "You know, without your sorrow, where would your power be? It's your sorrow that makes the people that you see and treat understand and makes you able to speak to them in ways that no one else can." And it ends with this quote that says, "In love's service, only wounded soldiers can serve." And so he's turned away from his healing. And at that moment, one of the guys who was healed, and he has to watch his other person rejoice in his healing, comes and says to him in his joy, he says, "Can you come with me, doctor, back to my house? Because my son is in a dark place and there's no one else that can talk to him when he's in that place that means as much as it does for you." And he takes the doctor with him, and that's kind of the end of the play. And it's this beautiful picture, I think, of the whole idea here that, here's this weakness, and uh and there's this great power in it. Um, and that doesn't mean it's not painful, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't cause suffering. And maybe that's the kind of thing that in other circumstances needs healing, but there are times in which it actually is glorifying God. Um, and it actually is bringing about something that, looks like his kingdom and needs to happen. And so, that's an example of kind of other places, but there's just different things that I've read either in the Bible or in other places that just kind of reinforce, like, once you start looking for it, there's a lot of reasons to hope in the face of weakness in something that is bigger than what you understand, but maybe God is doing.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah. I love that you just brought in hope, and it, it does, fill us with hope to recognize that our own weakness becomes an avenue of real, like, deep empathy for the people that we're serving. It's like from that
Yep.
place that we'll actually see and meet and attend to others in their own suffering. Yeah. So to kind of wrap up, for people who, a lot of people tuning in are preparing to participate in medical missions. But I'm sure this question would apply to even people who are right in the thick of it. But what do they need to be thinking and praying about on this topic as they're on the journey to serving in medical missions?
Um, yeah, I think it's really wise on the front end. I guess I would encourage people to be cognizant of wherever you're going, you're going to face all the times that you can't help as well as the times that you can. And and to sort of see that as like part of the responsibility and the vocation that you have, but also part of the way in which the Lord will work. I was trying to sum this up, and I don't know if I'm going to steal one of your other questions here, because it's like I talked about humility, you talked about compassion. Those are really good examples. More than anything else, I think the most common example of this is like when I'm in the hospital and I can't do it, whatever it is, and I can be honest about that, and I can talk to people about it. Then we all look to the Lord. The patients look to God, whether he will work by me or by someone else, but they're looking to God. I'm looking to God. We
Yeah.
turn our eyes towards him as the real true source of what we need. And I think that's probably the most common good fruit of being open and transparent about weakness. And so, preparing yourself and thinking about this awaiting you and recognizing that this may be part of how God works. It's good to think about it. It's good to talk to people about it. And if part of your preparation is short-term stuff, not maybe it's even longer term, but there's this on return phenomenon when you get done with your trip, whether you are going for years or whether you're going for a week or whatever, and you come back, think about how to share that with people. They're going to ask you how it was. And I think the most common tendency is like, let me share with you some of the amazing things. And I got all these non-amazing things too, but I don't even know how to talk about them. And I don't think you want to hear about them. So I'm not going to talk about those. But like embrace, like, look, here was this great thing that happened. And then let me pair that with like, here's this terrible thing that happened. And that's what it was like. It really was. And even if you don't know how to like wrap that up and to say, but God was glorified in my weakness, even so, because of blah, 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 because you have no idea how to talk about that. I don't think that's necessarily your job, but I think you don't have to hide from it. And you can just tell it how it is, and you can share it with people, and it probably will get you off of their pedestal, which is a really good thing. We want to be there, but we know we shouldn't want to be there on the pedestal. But it's good to be intentional about something that's going to show people that that's actually not, there's no reason to put me there. There's some things that go well, there's some things that don't go well. We're there, we're trying, and we're trusting in those things that don't go well in someone that's bigger than we are, who can hold all the things that we can't hold.
Yeah.
And to try to think about that as like a intentional testimony that you bring back from wherever you go.
Yeah. Man, well, thanks for sharing. I mean, what a solid foundation. Just you're laying a really solid foundation and groundwork for moving forward in this for people. So thanks for sharing your journey and your experience. And would love for you, if you're willing, to just close us out in a word of prayer.
Sure. Father, you are our hope. And it's not just work in medicine, Lord, but for everyone who's gathered together in prayer right now. There's just places in our lives that are broken. And they can be totally domestic and right in our family and right in our own hearts and right in our current situations, or they can be very far away, where we need to hear and we need to believe that you are at work, and you take the weakness that we have and you glorify yourself. And in doing so, you bring us new life, and you bring new life to your creation. And so I join together in prayer, whoever hears it, and asking you to lead them, give them hope, help them to trust now where they're at, to learn and to build that now where they're at, and wherever, Lord, you are taking them, and wherever they would go, especially in this world of medical missions that we're talking about. I pray, Lord, that you would help them to carry that as an extension of what they've learned about you into the places where they go, that you would be glorified in their weaknesses, wherever you lead them. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.